Namaste, welcome. I'm Dayna Serye, co-founder of Hanuman Academy, and we are back at the Yoga and Self-Mastery Summit, where we are cultivating the deeper dimensions of practice. We're here at the Hanuman Festival, and I'm so honored to have the opportunity to sit with Gina Caputo. And Gina is a Boulder resident yogi now, elevating yoga education for all of us. So thank you so much for being here, Gina.
Thank you.
Yeah, so much to talk about, yeah?
Always.
Always. So I think it would be interesting to start off with, you know, yoga, the yoga industry is what it is today, and we're in a process of evolution, perhaps, in the yoga path here in the West. And what do you see in the yoga industry today that you'd like to, you know, steer or elevate for us all?
I'd say one of the biggest things I see are teachers really desperately trying to find their place in the grand scheme of modern postural yoga and in this climate, this is like the macrocosmic climate, the climate of the world, being of service to people while there's a lot of things going on. There's also, I think, a bit of teachers trying to find not only their place, but their voice and what we could probably call their power. And I mean that, of course, in the most positive way. But to be able to be of service with depth, with integrity, with authenticity. And I think what gets really challenging is we all kind of see what works. You know, social media certainly, and some of the industry surrounding yoga makes it very visible, like what's working. You see who's popular, you see what they're doing. I'm old enough and have been in the industry long enough to have been here like pre-social media. Yeah. And so I saw what happened and how people rose to fame, in some cases, perhaps for the aesthetic that they presented. And then in other cases, there might have been a beautiful aesthetic, given that it's largely a photographic medium, but for both their aesthetic and maybe also for a depth of wisdom. But certainly what's easiest to transmit via these mediums is the visual, the aesthetic. And I see, in terms of what I want to elevate, is I would love for people to see that. We can certainly appreciate that, but also to see that there are more dimensions to this being a teacher than simply your aesthetic presentation. And I think that some of the confusion or the struggle around finding your place as a teacher is you're trying to assess what appears to be working, like how to get your voice and your offering out there. But how to balance that with what we would call sadhana or study, so that there lends more depth to the offering that they make. I think that ultimately that's likely to be more deeply satisfying when you have platforms to present yourself, but you also feel that you can genuinely back that up.
Yeah, so there's an authentic offering happening that's based in deep practice, deep study. Deep practice,
deep study. And the other thing I would say would be very open experience and broad experience. So I think that for all the formal study that I've done, apprenticeships and trainings galore and all, and certainly tons of reading and courses, retreats and all of that, I feel like in some ways where I've learned the most has been just experientially. And I'm talking about we're in this business of being of service to other humans. And I feel like the work that I've tried to do, we could call it offline, you know, like not the formal coursework, that's actually been of great service in meeting people where they are. And this is something that I talk about in teacher trainings, is the importance of having, I always call it this giant sombrero of knowledge. And that's where when you say the depth and breadth of practice, that's where we as teachers can kind of build this giant sombrero of knowledge. And then maybe the art of teaching comes in when you figure out exactly how much of that knowledge to put forth to your students at the right pace, in the right way. And I think a sign of a great teacher is one who has really not only studied and practiced, but also really had open and broad experiences in life so as to really understand the full spectrum of human experience. You know, and I feel like that has been of great service. It also informs me in how I can be of service, which is going to be different from how you as a teacher are of service or anyone else is. So that's something that I want us to use tools that we can then put forth in what we would call the real world, you know, your non-formal yoga environments, and then continue to learn. I think that feeds your teaching. And so I like to highlight that opportunity is there literally 24/7 for teachers kind of finding their way. So that's something I'm very passionate about, because I think an empowered teacher is going to be a teacher who's more impactful on students that are seeking.
Yeah, I really loved what you're saying about how each teacher is going to be their own flavor of teacher. They have their own gifts to offer, their own karma or dharma for their offering, and that opportunity to find their authenticity. Yeah. And I know that's a really important topic to you.
It is.
Yeah.
And it really comes from the soil of my own experience as a teacher. Just what I was speaking of, where you see something that works. You see something that seems to be resonating with other people. I think it's not surprising that one, including me, would gravitate towards that. Oh, this is how you do it right. And I actually spent more years than I care to remember trying to be more like a particular teacher, because I felt like that symbolized the right way to do it.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I'm denying what my own natural gifts and talents were, which arguably were not at all the same as this particular teacher I was emulating. And so it's not that it was a waste, because clearly I learned something from it, but I did feel like I spent a lot of time feeling like as soon as I can stop doing these things and do more of these things, and the sooner I look more like that instead of like this, and the sooner I can do this sequence of postures instead of what I'm maybe more naturally gifted at, and so on and so forth. It just felt like I was in a state of struggle. And it begs the question, was I really serving anybody at that time? Because I was waiting for me to feel, like now I'm a real teacher. And I always like to credit the state of Colorado for really saying to me, no, we can tell that's not you. Like, you do you, because that's the only way we want you. And whether that was real or imagined, I don't know, but it felt around the right time.
Wow.
And I just felt like, yeah,
it's time to be me.
It's time to be me.
Yeah.
And then I feel like as soon as I really committed to that and stopped trying to be what I thought a yoga teacher looked like and spoke like and acted like, then I think, hopefully, I was more impactful. It seemed like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a more genuine connection between me and the people showing up.
So what was that process like? Because I feel like that's so normal, and it's sort of fundamental in our culture in some ways that we're striving to be something.
Yes.
Like we're always striving.
Yes.
There's always something else or better or more.
Yes.
And so there's a baseline of striving and of wanting to be something, and we're not enough as we are.
Yeah.
In the culture in general, it feels like. And so what was your process like to, peel back those layers? And
I think when I really, not literally looked in the mirror, but when I really took a good look at the way I was feeling and behaving, so much of what I was doing was just marked with a feeling of struggle. So when you talk about striving, for me, that striving, moving away from who I really was and towards who I thought I should be, it really felt like a lot of struggle and, quite frankly, a fair amount of self-loathing. I never felt like I looked right, for one thing, and I didn't feel like I spoke right because I speak plainly, And so there was a lot of struggle and a bit of self-loathing. And I think when you have the courage to be very honest with yourself, how have I been feeling this whole period of time? And when you acknowledge and you're willing to admit, not good.
Yeah.
I haven't been feeling good or happy. I've been prolonging a feeling of contentment this whole time, thinking I'm going to get there. And when you talk about that cultural-wide striving, and then I added the struggle that comes with it, it of course makes me think of one of the foundational teachings of Raja Yoga, of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, of course, the niyama santosha, contentment. And as a passionate Italian woman, when I first learned that, contentment to me sounded like just accept everything as it is. And of course, it's far more nuanced than that. And for me personally, what santosha means at this point is a contentment with what is, which is, you know, largely how it's translated. A contentment with what is, just as I am. But I like to add, as if there was an asterisk next to it, was like, but don't give up your curiosity. And so what was striving and struggling for something that I wasn't has now become a santosha, a contentment with what is, just as I am, knowing I can't possibly be everyone's teacher. Oh, but I keep a little curiosity alive, like that little spark of curiosity that keeps me wondering, this is fine, but what's possible? And that feels very different from the striving and struggle that you spoke of.
Yeah.
And we're talking about my experience as a yoga teacher, but that is a, like you said, a universal experience.
Yeah.
And that maybe that recipe is one that I now apply to really all aspects of my life.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's so interesting to me is that, you know, this baseline of stress that we all feel. It's like, I like how you're phrasing it as struggle. And there's like, it's like a stressful vibration. And so we can recognize, I like what you said, we can recognize that we're maybe not on the right track of our authenticity if we're feeling this type of struggle and stress. Yeah, and if we're in our authenticity, we might actually like relax and feel like a sense of ease. And so we can sort of understand where we are maybe on the spectrum with gauging that.
I think what you're touching on is also something I'm deeply passionate about, which is how our practices, our yoga practices serve us in our lives off the mat. And so you really just honed in on one, which is, I believe that asana, pranayama, meditation, these are all practices that cultivate like a transcendence of conditioned consciousness, right? So not just kind of the autopilot that I experienced my entire life up until yoga.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden, I'm hypervigilant to what's going on in the inner landscape. And that's where I think you're able to understand well, to see within yourself, this is struggle. And this is a great sign that something is off. You know, and I think I'd like to also just say that sometimes the alternative to that struggle is not bliss and delight. So you can acknowledge it, and then you can, as you said, relax and feel some ease. But when I'm in that state of, ooh, struggle, and then I relax around that, it doesn't necessarily feel good. It feels different, right? And so the challenge, whatever it is I was struggling with, may still be there, but it's not in its same power and it's not in its same form. It's like, yes, there is a relaxation. For me, struggle feels like a clenching and a gripping. And so there's like the relaxing of that grip, but it doesn't mean like, oh, and now it's all shanti.
Right.
You know, it's just that,
well,
like,
I like,
ooh.
you know, the Rumpelstiltskin effect. It's like when you see it and you call it, then it loses its power, like you're saying. And so then it has a different feel, not that it's gone and doesn't have to be dealt with anymore.
Right.
And I know that's something you're really passionate about the wholeness, bringing all the parts. Yeah, and as in yoga, you know, we don't always do that, maybe, or at least social media, or, you know, what we present is more of the perfection, the beauty.
Totally.
Can you speak to that a little bit, in the importance of really calling in all the parts?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One thing that a bit of feedback that people often give me, and it's awkward to acknowledge it, but I'll just say it, is, you're so funny. And I don't really feel like I'm trying to be funny on purpose, but where that's coming from is how important I think it is to have a good sense of humor about this whole thing we call yoga practice. And what I mean by that is, what arises is often disturbing, maybe surprising, shocking. Like, I don't want to believe that I was kind of blindly moving through some experience a particular way, and then I practice and I see that. And if I don't have a healthy sense of humor around what I'm noticing within myself, this whole thing can become very heavy. This whole thing we call practice can be very heavy. You either shift into spiritual bypassing and just, I don't want to focus on that, and you kind of sweep it under the, you know, faux bearskin rug. That's one approach.
Yeah.
Or the other approach is, wow. Like, there I was, just tootling along. And I love, keeping old journals. And then you look back in your journal and you're just like, oh, sweetie, you're just adorable. You really were just like, and this, and this, and this. And then you get a little further down your path. And instead of criticizing myself or beating myself up, which I believe is a waste of our precious life force, you kind of just, as you say, relax around it and observe.
Yeah.
And something Sean Korn said many years ago, and I'm completely paraphrasing, but it really stuck with me, was around this idea of looking at the fabric of your own life and your own existence. And nowadays, I would say, look at the fabric of your wholeness. So that includes mistakes I've made, failures, wonderful joys, great successes, all of it, like the mandala of human experience. I fold that in. And in my willingness to look at all of it, I can actually be of greater service to others. And sometimes it's not your successes that are the greater service of others, but it's all the things that we would label like on the shadow side.
Yeah.
And I think in not having a relaxed, almost sense of humor around what arises, I'm not making light of any mistakes we've made. Yeah. It's just that the alternative would be to try to forget them or self-flagellate around them. Yeah. And sometimes it's just like, but that's what you knew at that time.
Yeah.
A lot of the decisions we make are just simply based on what we knew at that time. And that's kind of like, oh, cute.
Right? It's innocent, right?
It is, in a way, sure.
In a way, it's sort of like it was just the way we knew how to do it, to get by.
And it felt right.
It felt right. There was a reason for it at the time.
Totally.
I had a teacher once who said, don't take anything seriously, take everything spiritually. Which I thought was it's really good, right? Because we can be so hard on ourselves. And I like what you're saying. It's not that we're bypassing it, but just don't be so heavy about it.
Always, right.
Yeah.
Right. And then that really dovetails into one I love. Be sincere, not serious. In fact, I thought you were going to say that one.
That one, that's
I know.
That's great. Yeah, I think it's a really important conversation, how to get more authentic. And because what I find in my path, what I've found is when my teachers are authentic, it gives me the permission to be myself, and my whole body relaxes, my whole being relaxes, because then I can mess up too.
That's right.
Or, be imperfect too.
I am so passionate about this at this moment, literally hot and on fire around this topic.
Yeah.
Because I think we're at a point in the yoga industry where if we are going to continue to have these practices and be of service, particularly as teachers, we have to normalize conversation around that whole mandala of human experience. Yeah. And one of the ways that happens is, like you just described, when a teacher speaks of an experience. Now, let's all agree that we're not talking about like a teacher using their class as a therapy session and dumping everything.
Right.
But in illuminating more of that full spectrum of experience, whether it's in person or social media or any other way of doing so, then it does give our students permission. It's this I see you, like I see a feeling that you just shared in me, and now I feel more relaxed around that and almost free to like work it through. Yeah. And I like to think of, emotions being more like rivers. And when we try to dam those up with this idea that we aren't supposed to feel that way, or that indicates we're a failure or a fraud, I think we're going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
So I think that we could go a long way as teachers, as people of influence, if you're not a teacher, as friends. I think we could go a long way to normalizing this whole spectrum of experience so that I think maybe people feel less alone, which is, I think, huge. But also connected, like I'm not alone, and this other person, not only am I not alone, but I think they may know what I'm talking about.
Right.
And I'm just feeling more and more this notion of being seen and seeing each other, not in a look at me way, but in that recognition way. I feel like, I'm not sure if I'm going to go so far as to say it's the most important thing that needs to happen, but it's an important thing.
Well, that was one of my questions.
Yeah?
Yeah, like what is like one of the most important things, or what is needed, like what do people need to grok at a deep level? So, I mean, you already answered it, but...
Yeah, I think I think in terms of relating with others, we are as good as we are willing to look within ourselves. I think empathy is huge, and I think that the practices of yoga give us an opportunity to really see what would be this current state of the union, and also develop the practices and tools that may get us to where we would like to be as humans, relating with one another. So that may be cultivating practices of forgiveness, or I'll tell you a huge one is non-judgmental listening. And maybe I'm projecting here, but like I'm a problem solver. So I know I have a big problem with you come to me and I do want to listen, but I also want to solve your problem immediately. And maybe there's some arrogance in there that I have yet to uncover. I like to think it's just because I want to help you. And maybe, who knows, right? I haven't gotten there yet. But the fact of the matter is, I'm learning maybe people don't want you to fix it. They don't want you to answer it. They just want you to listen and hold space and back to that, like, see them. And so I think in terms of our yoga practice, I really do believe that because those practices all have that unifying thread of awareness, I can't help but think the deeper we go into that, the more we embrace that very simple concept. I am becoming more aware. I am becoming more aware. I am becoming more aware, that it empowers me then to be there for others, for each other, for us to be in space as we are. I mean, I'm no fortune teller or prophet, but I can't help but think that that won't help a lot. And if our practice, I'll just say, if our practice stays on the mat, I'm not sure it has that much value.
I feel like this piece you're speaking to about, you know, seeing in each other. I mean, it really just goes right back to the beginning when you were talking about santosha and contentment and having that curiosity and that possibility for the potential while being okay with what is. And it's really beautiful to see that in each other and then to see that in the self and to, in the mandala of humanity, to hold that we don't have to lose our light sides.
No.
To go to the dark. And I think that's what a lot of people are afraid of. That if they like open up that Pandora's box, that they will get lost in it and that this doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the challenge that we may be facing as yogis is we love to embrace the light, and that's important because as other, let's say, forces in the world seem to be championing the dark. And then really, what is the dark? I'm going to just say, I think dark is that which is divisive. The dark is that which is maybe done with no recognition of your impact on the rest of the universe. And in yoga, of course, we call that karma, right? So dark may be that which exists in this sort of self-serving vacuum. And so while we have those forces chugging right along in the world, there are, let's say, the yogis and you know, if people don't identify as a yogi, people that are on a path that we could term, you know, light, the light path versus the dark path, if there's that. I think the challenge that we face in embracing wholeness is, as you just said, there's like this fear of if I turn that way, will I get lost in that abyss? Will I ever find my way back? And does that somehow hurt this movement towards the light? And so I think the challenge we may face is how do we champion these virtues, these qualities that are beneficial to all beings, and yet somehow have the courage, you know, to turn towards the darkness. So I guess what I mean is how do we champion them without excluding that whole side of the human spectrum? And this is where I think community and openness and honesty could really be of benefit, right? If I'm willing to say to you without fear of judgment that this is how I've been feeling, and it's not all love and light. In fact, it's a lot of darkness, and I'm stuck. I feel like the more that we communicate those things, maybe, possibly, that begins to feel like a slightly safer space. Maybe we have to do a little experiment where you kind of dip your toe into it. But if you feel supported, perhaps that fear of losing the light diminishes. Maybe, maybe. I don't have the answers, but I feel that there needs to be some kind of collective courage, right? Where we continue to champion that which will serve all beings, right? But at the same time, recognize that maybe the way that we get there is in turning towards and acknowledging, these are the regressive patterns that may be keeping me from truly stepping there rather than like on the surface stepping there. And this is tricky and it's scary, and I don't ever want to diminish that and say, oh, just do it, because we all have different thresholds for what arises. Some of us have very high shame thresholds and some of us very low. So maybe if we, as a collective, really begin to normalize and acknowledge these things that are very human, and this stuckness and a heaviness, and every variation of that. If we could acknowledge them, maybe people would feel more confident turning towards them, because it was a slightly less scary space. I mean, this is also, I think you're making me think of, as yoga teachers or anything within the umbrella of yoga, a teacher in that regard, could we perhaps help resource people on that challenging and sometimes scary journey? And this is where I love to think about, like, how does asana translate to that set of tools? So, you know, for me, things like holding forearm plank or warrior three, or these things that really bring us nose to nose with attachment and aversion and these challenges. It brings us nose to nose with them. Can we find a way to non-injuriously stay? And I feel like that day in, day out, or sit with on your cushion and doing the like, you know, maybe not actually bobbling your head, but internally just like suffering on your cushion. But you stay, and you stay, and you stay. If you do this little by little, slowly but surely, little by little, could you then experience the strength, the stamina, and the fortitude to turn towards the whole spectrum of experience and maybe feel less reticent or less scared to go there? So I feel like as teachers, there's possibly more that we could do to give context to the challenges we offer our students physically in practice. Like,
this is why we're holding this pose for 5 minutes.
Well, give them a glimpse into how it may be of service when we're not together on Wednesdays. Or whatever it is.
Because what we do on the mat is to serve our lives.
And it just goes back to, if your practice is staying on the mat, I'm not sure it's that valuable. And so for me as a teacher, I am constantly gauging how much is this serving people when they're not here on the little sticky mat on Wednesdays at noon or whatever it is. And so I think that there is more we could do. And this goes back to what I was saying about, you know, as you said, grokking, like knowing a breadth of human experience, doing the work to really understand people and their lives and their feelings, their psyches, their waves, you know, what triggers us, doing our best to understand that as much as we possibly can, I think helps us as teachers then give relevance to the asana. I mean, I don't deny that you could just do it with no guidance whatsoever and still experience some of the fruits. But given that we all come together very often, and here you are in this role, like a leadership role as the teacher, could we in fact just highlight, it's almost like you have one of those little laser pens, just highlight, this little moment may serve you when you're dealing with someone and you're also feeling aversion. Just like you might be right now in forearm plank.
Yes. Yes, I think so. I love it.
Hope.
Yeah. Well, in our last couple of minutes, is there any final words of wisdom or, you know, anything important that feels like wants to be said this time?
I don't feel like I identify as a, very wise person, but I will say that one of the things that has helped me most and kind of ties into what we've been talking about here today is the importance of recognizing that every little bit of your journey as a human can be folded into what we would call your spirituality. Like this thing that is life, this evolutionary journey, can we find the grace to fold it all in? And so there have been two mantras that are not like classical mantras that I call on over and over and over again. So if you want to call this wisdom, you can, but it's mostly in the moment of something unpleasant happening, I do my best to remember this too I can use, this too I can include. And when we think realistically about our pasts, we know that sometimes in the darkest moments, we've experienced the most growth. So I try to remind myself, this too I can use, this too I can include. And the second piece is, in that difficult journey, relax around your process. And that's not to make light of anything. It's just to say, when we clench, we get stuck. And so can we move ahead with integrity, with drive, with curiosity, but also have that little bit of relaxation, which I think affords us the ability then to relax around others' processes and be more tolerant of where they are in this moment, knowing you've been there too.
Right, back to vulnerability.
Back to it. It's like
getting real, getting real. Here we are.
That's right, baby.
Well, thank you so much, Dayna.
Thanks for the honor of being here.
Today.
Yes.
We love you so much.
Thank
We're so happy you're part of our Hanuman family.
Thank you. Thanks for all the opportunities.
Yes. Namaste.
Namaste.